So since YouTube changes standards for what channels are eligible for monetization just literally days after I had finally hit all of the criteria, I decided to mark the occasion by airing a video that would be invariably demonetized anyways. Many of us are a special kind of asshole. This is just a fantastic way to start a video, just insulting everybody. I can already feel the comments and the dislikes just coming on in.
Let the hate flow through you.
So I promise this isn't me just venting or being edgy or misanthropic for views. I'm actually using asshole in an academic sense. There is, at least according to some philosophers, a concrete definition of what constitutes an asshole. Some means of classifying people as such based upon their actions and their intent. But when we look at this definition, especially when considering findings from moral and social psychology, we come to realize that there actually may be a lot more assholes out there than we may see at first glance. In fact, it turns out that many of us are a selective and unique kind of asshole. So I'm going to rely pretty heavily on Dr. Aaron James's book, Assholes, A Theory. It's a fantastic book, it's super thought-provoking. I highly recommend picking it up and reading it for yourself. So to clarify, first and foremost, most people aren't assholes in the way that we would normally consider it when using this language informally, or even in the sense that Dr. James uses in his book. These meanings tend to paint assholishness as a permanent fixture of one's general attitudes and actions towards others. You know, the guy who always cuts in line, swerves in and out of traffic, makes mean jokes at the expense of others, but can't take the smallest criticism without acting like you've somehow insulted all of his ancestors and posterity at once. All of us come across people like this in our daily lives, and indeed, many of us are probably acquainted with someone who fits this description. But while we may cathartically cuss them out and attribute that label to them, James argues that we can distill from these actions a definition of what it means to be an asshole. James delineates three such criteria. First, the asshole allows himself special advantage and does so systematically. Second, he does this out of an entrenched sense of entitlement. And third, is immunized by his sense of entitlement against the complaints of other people. And when we're thinking about how people generally interact with each other, it's clear that most do not fall under these criteria, which is probably good because, presumably if everybody was an asshole, society would literally collapse. But all it takes is a few minutes of watching the news or perusing interactions on social media to realize that it tends to be dominated by assholes and assholish behavior. Indeed, people who are probably rather kind and polite in normal discourse appear to transform into total assholes when the right circumstances are brought up. And it's not that people are acting like assholes in rare instances, it's like Dr. Jekyll and Asshole Hyde. The monster is never not there, it's just not always visible or fully in control. To understand this, let's revisit the definition of an asshole, looking at it through the lens of moral psychology and studies into human behavior. First, they allow themselves to enjoy special advantages and do so systematically. By and large, most don't tend to think of themselves as the kind of folk who would extract resources selfishly if given the opportunity. However, there's a saying that goes, give a man a little bit of power and he'll show you his true face. And research into psychology shows that this statement is pretty apt. Research published in the journal Psychological Science shows that when people are randomly and arbitrarily given a modicum of power, they are more likely to see others as wrong for cheating and for breaking the rules. However, they are then more likely to cheat and break the rules themselves. They are also much more likely to pass harsher judgment onto others than they would onto themselves. Another methodologically problematic but visceral example of this comes from the infamous Stanford prison experiment. When the students were randomly selected into being a guard, a position of elevated power compared to those selected as prisoners, they responded by making their fellow students engage in demeaning tasks and by subjecting them to psychological abuse. Indeed, psychology is replete with studies that show that when you give individuals even a small amount of relative power, it can bring out the absolute worst in us and do so in a systematic way. Second, they do this out of an entrenched sense of entitlement. The word entrenched may be a bit heavy-handed here, but research and rationalization shows that people are relatively quick to come up with explanations to justify their bad behavior. A 2011 study in the journal Organizational Behavior and Human Decision Processes showed that people are quick to lie when there are reasonable justifications for their dishonesty on hand. The researchers asked people to roll a die 3 times with the outcome influencing how much money they would receive. They were told that only the first roll was to count toward this end, but to do so 3 times in order to verify that the die was fair. but people would often report the highest of the three roles as the first one. And as long as the reported value was actually seen amongst the three roles and wasn't just a hypothetical 6, respondents were less likely to see the misreporting as being deceptive. We tell ourselves stories to justify behavior that we know isn't, acceptable or that we would see as unpalatable in others. The reason that we don't call our parents more is because, we're just too busy, and the reason that we cut people off in traffic is because we were in a hurry, or the reason that we cussed out that person online is because they totally deserved it. It wasn't because we were acting poorly. There has to be a reason behind it. Part of the explanation for this phenomenon comes from construal level theory and psychological distancing. Both of these are really interesting topics that deserve a video in their own right, so I'm going to reserve them for a future video. It's not entitlement as we would normally think about it, but it definitely is a certain kind of self-centeredness and selfishness. Third, is immune to the complaints of other people. This is seen pretty readily when we deceive or when we engage in other things that would, constitute a general lapse into assholishness. This goes back to the literature on rationalization, right? I mean, we will tell ourselves things in order to justify and insulate ourselves from the criticism of others. That this is something that everybody does, that this is something that, we only had to do once, etc., etc. And this manifests itself in really interesting ways. For instance, in one study, subjects were queried as to whether or not they saw themselves as honest people, and the vast preponderance, nearly 100% of them, said that yes, they do. This despite the fact that a large plurality of them had just lied in order to secure more money from the experiment that they had just completed. Even when people are explicitly confronted with their dishonesty, a common tactic is for them to double down about the occurrences, or to try to change the subject, or indeed, sometimes their memories may change in order to make it that they feel the event actually transpired in the way that they were telling it. And that's really one of the disconcerting things about all of this, because when you think about this long and hard, you realize that these descriptors and these findings don't just generalize and describe people that we know. They can very well describe us, too. James gets at this in his book by arguing with a similar logic of just how one misdeed doesn't sully the name of a superhero. Performing one assholish act does not necessarily make one an asshole. It just means that somebody messed up. We are in fact only human. We are bound to error. And while I may be sympathetic to that argument, because who wouldn't be? The thing is that what he's describing are more like random lapses into unpalatable behavior. But what these studies are showing is that these are systematic ways in which we deviate and reveal an internal, assholish tendency. To go back to our Jekyll and Hyde analogy, if Dr. Jekyll were to just randomly transform into the monster, we really couldn't say that it was his fault or some sort of latent tendency. This is just something that would accidentally happen, a slip-up. But the thing is that he had to drink the potion that made him become the monster. He was fully aware of what he was doing. And although we may not be aware when we're drinking the metaphorical tonic that turns us into assholes, we are equally willing to just ignore the evidence or rationalize it away when the inevitable fallout comes. So what can we do? Well, unfortunately, James is relatively quiet on this topic. Indeed, when you go through the book and read it, it seems like he's writing for non-assholes to understand the behavior of assholes, as opposed to assholes trying to understand their own motivations and behavior. He does have a chapter at the end of the book in which he tries to address a hypothetical asshole and try to convince them that their ways are wrong, to recognize that they do not have a universal purchase on moral superiority. And although it's a bit apples to oranges, I think the general intent of this message could help us too. If we keep that in mind as well, right? If we remember that we are not uniquely entitled to special privilege, if we acknowledge the ways in which we are liable to lapse into assholish tendencies, to apologize quickly when they come up, and to take the criticisms, the helpful criticisms of others, with a grain of salt. I mean, obviously, I do YouTube, I interact on the internet, I know that we need to take some critiques with a little bit of salt, but to do so and still be self-reflective, right? I think that is an easy way to avoid being this selective kind of asshole that we've talked about in this video, and just one in general. I don't know. My 2 cents at least. I'm curious to see what you guys think about this. Are assholes really more prevalent than we think? Does everyone kind of have this internal asshole just kind of lurking within them, ready to burst out given the systematic opportunity? I'm really curious to see what you guys think about this, so drop your comments down in the comment section below. Look forward to reading all of them and answering a few of them in the next comment response video. Sources for everything else will be down in the doobly-doo, as well as links to the Facebook, the Twitter, and the blog. Look forward to seeing you guys out there as well. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you consider giving it a thumbs up, and if you want to support the channel, you can do so by commenting down below, by sharing this video, by subscribing to the channel to stay in the loop for more awesome social science content is uploaded. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time.